The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Vancouver, beautiful, yes, but no doubt about it, Vancouver is beautiful. It's beautiful to visit. It's a beautiful place to study, and it's a beautiful city to retire in. But, says Bridgitte Anderson, the CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, it's not so beautiful of a place to build a robust economy. And in fact, according to a new report commissioned by GVBOT, the region's economic size and mix underperforms when it comes to creating high-paid jobs or high-performing companies. Compared to 20 other high-quality, mid-sized city regions spanning 9 pillars across economy, livability, infrastructure, and sustainability, Vancouver is well below par. Anderson says Vancouver ranked 14 among the 20 cities for prosperity factors. Looking ahead, Anderson says the region has to address its underlying weaknesses soon if we hope to stay competitive. And central to our ability to compete is Vancouver's beautiful geography, an area that is also confined by sea and mountains. Anderson says the upshot is that we have to innovate more deeply to stimulate housing, job, and economic development. I invited Bridgitte Anderson, the President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, to join me for a conversation that matters about where our attention needs to turn to close our productivity and prosperity gaps. Bridgitte, welcome.
Nice to be here.
This is quite a report. What prompted the commissioning of it?
Well, you know, we have been stuck in pandemic-related data for a number of years. We have seen and heard from our members anecdotally that the economy is not in a great place. But you can't really talk about that unless you have the data. So we wanted to measure where we are comparative to other global cities. And we looked at similar cities then as Greater Vancouver. And we looked at port cities, we looked at livability cities, and we chose cities from across the globe. So in Asia, in Europe, in Canada, in the US, we wanted to really have a holistic view. And we worked with an organization out of the UK called the Business of Cities, and they pulled together over 500 data points that put this report together. And what we found, Vancouver, as you said, we have a very strong brand. And so that is sort of the perception. But when you look at performance, we are lagging. And so the concern for us in the business community and as a voice of the business community is we need to address this urgently. There is I think a conversation that's been happening for several months now, or longer than that, but I think more acutely in the last several months around productivity, that Canada suffers productivity. And certainly this report found that. I mean, you talked about prosperity. Yes, we placed 14th out of 20, but our productivity measured 63rd out of 100 global cities. We need to address that because addressing it then will raise the standard of living for all, not just for businesses, but for individuals and families.
So when we talk about this productivity gap, and I know because I've done interviews about this, it then relates into per capita GDP, which of course is directly related to what individual salaries are, is part of the challenge in Vancouver, and I think it's partly in Canada. We look about us and we go, well, I don't know, it looks pretty good here, that we don't really recognize that we're sliding backwards because we don't have that comparative measure.
That is in part true, and I think also for Greater Vancouver, it is a lifestyle city, and people move here for a different kind of experience than they would move to Calgary or Toronto, for example. You know, and Vancouver in this report very clearly, the Greater Vancouver region, we have world-class institutions and we have a highly skilled workforce. However, we have not been able to translate that, and so we see a smaller base of high-paying jobs and a smaller base of high-performing companies. Maybe that's not such a surprise to many of us who've lived in this region, like you and I, for a long time. We know we don't have as many headquarters, for example.
Right.
But when we're talking about high-paying jobs, coupled with the affordability challenges that we've been seeing, that is very concerning, because if we don't address this, we're just going to see more of a hollowing out of the region. And so it becomes an urgent matter that needs to be addressed, not just by government and not just by the BC government, but by all levels of government and by industry.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
So one of the things that I found interesting in reading the report is talking about creating a narrative that says this is where we want to move. You know, they use the example from Tel Aviv. You go back 10, 15, maybe a little bit longer ago in Tel Aviv, they sort of thought of themselves as a nightlife and beach city. And they went, no. We're much more than that. We're in a center of innovation where we want to attract risk capital. We want to build the structures. And they kept telling that story. But what I found interesting in there is they kept telling the story over and over and over again. And I think this is, it really struck me that this is one thing that we don't do in Vancouver. We don't talk about ourselves as a place to be doing business. We keep talking about us, oh, it's so livable and it's so beautiful. Do we now need to start to celebrate what business brings to the economy and to our quality of life and what it creates as far as future opportunities is concerned?
If I could take a term from the mayor of the city of Vancouver, we need to get our economic swagger back, not just our swagger when it comes to the experience of being in Vancouver as a visitor or as a resident, because overall the report showed that we have a lot of strength in that area. But what we need to do is we need to ensure that we can scale and grow companies, and particularly where we're seeing some strength. So life sciences is a great example. We have strength in the life sciences sector. We have strength in clean energy and clean technology. We've got strength in a number of other areas in the economy in Greater Vancouver. And so we need to be able to really support the development of those companies. So access to capital, access to talent, and dealing with some of those issues, whether it's affordability around housing or whether it is helping those companies grow. You know, I hearken back to the industrial land report that we delivered last fall at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, which showed very clearly that we don't have the kind of land that other jurisdictions have. We've got the oceans and the mountains, and we've got the border, and so we are a restrained area.
We're landlocked.
We are landlocked. And so what that means is that businesses have a hard time finding the land that they need to build a bigger plant or a facility or what it might mean. And so we have to be able to address that. We have to address affordability in many measures around wages and around housing. Our benchmarking Greater Vancouver report showed that rent has accelerated faster in Greater Vancouver than any other jurisdiction, almost globally, but certainly in North America. And so these are the kinds of factors that go into building a robust economy. And we need to be able to create that narrative about, maybe it's connecting the dots as well, about why it's important. I have found that maybe it was 10 years ago, we talked about energy literacy and why it was important. We need to be talking about the economy and why the economy is important, because if we are not building a strong economy, you don't have the revenues to support the social services that are needed. And that certainly is an issue in Vancouver.
I thought it was interesting. I was reading a piece about Brad West. And he was talking about, he said, we've kind of lost the narrative around what makes our economy tick, what makes for a livable life for people who are working. And we're talking about so many other things other than that. And he's now starting to say, we have to start talking about, well, what is it that we need to do collectively? And I think this comes back a little bit to the narrative. But I also in that go, okay, we keep saying, okay, well, we've got to put in this measure, we've got to do that measure. We've slowed down the approval process on projects, on the development of concepts and ideas, to the point where investment dollars look at us and say, it's too risky. I don't even know whether or not my money's going to make it through the regulatory or the approval process. How important is it that we start to focus in on that as being a priority and then streamlining it?
Well, in this province, we have relied on population-led growth for a long time. We've had 1 million people move to this region the last 10 years or so, and we're expecting another 1 million in the next 10 years or so. And we have to get away from that and move to productivity-led growth. So what does that mean? It means infrastructure investments. It means regulatory and tax environment that is business-friendly. It means R&D. It means access to capital. And I would say, generally speaking, there is a lack of understanding of why this is important. And I'm not talking just at levels of government. But I think that is true. I think that the spectrum has really gone towards how important social issues are. And believe me, they are. Health is very important. We have an aging population. Mental health and wellness is important. And we have to have a strong social fabric. Where we seem to have lost the plot, and I'm talking generally about society, is that it is a strong economy that drives the revenues to fund those social services that are required for a strong social fabric in society. And so we have to get away from the idea that economy and business are bad words. They're not. It's incredibly important. And so we have to figure out where we are lacking, which was the reason for this report, and then come forward with solutions. I'm a very strong believer that we can't keep saying there's a problem. We have to come up with solutions, and we have to work with government for those solutions.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
But if you take a look at coverage about business in British Columbia, there's hardly anything left. I mean, we've got BIV. There's virtually no business pages in the major papers any longer. It doesn't get carried on radio or television. We're not making heroes out of the people who are remarkable innovators. Coming back to this idea, part of a narrative, we need to create that. And that, I think, is, one of the steps. Then let's come back and start talking about some of the other steps.
I think that's true. When I look also at media, and you and I were both in media, and man, things have changed since then. So I don't think people are listening and reading and watching mainstream media. And mainstream media has changed a great deal as well. They have less resources, their focus is different, it perhaps might be more editorialized than it was before. But where are people getting their information? I think that's a big part of the problem, is that there is a volume of information that we can barely keep up with, all of us individually. And so where we're getting that information matters, and also having those conversations and allowing space and time for conversations that are really complex.
And thus we lose that link between understanding having a robust economy gives us the money to look after all the social programs that I think we all agree that we need to have. But let's recognize where the source of that revenue comes from. So back to the report. One of the things that I thought that was really quite interesting, and I know is a fundamental challenge that we have here, is we have an infrastructure deficit on so many levels. The report touched on it. What's it tell us?
Well, there's a number of things. So the infrastructure deficit, and let's think about, we have aging population, we have aging infrastructure, and we have governments that have not put as much money into infrastructure, and that really matters. So if I think about it if we just take one piece of it, so we know that according to this report that we have higher transit ridership in this region. We've recovered post-pandemic better than many, many other regions. And of course, we're certainly seeing that. There's overcrowding and there's congestion, and transit is infrastructure that needs to be funded. It is the movement of people and goods in some cases, but mostly the movement of people around the region, and is correlated to housing and affordability. And we have a federal government that has a permanent transit fund that is supposed to kick in, but not until 2026, where we already have, if you just look at Greater Vancouver alone, we have had the equivalent of the city of North Vancouver move into this region, 70,000 people, and it continues to grow. So funding infrastructure is incredibly important. I also learned, I was on the mayor's budget task force for the city of Vancouver. And, that was an interesting experience and process. We're understanding the kind of downloading or offloading that's happened from various levels of government to municipalities. Municipalities are bursting at the seams, dealing with all this population growth, but not getting the kind of funding that perhaps came from federal government many years ago. And I know there's only one taxpayer, but I would say that there needs to be an alignment with the population growth and infrastructure funding. And that would start to address some of the productivity issues that we're seeing.
I want to keep moving through different items here because it's a pretty dense report. Yeah. Another thing that struck me quite a bit was, if you take a look at the city of Vancouver, you go, you got it all. Like, it's a livable city, you got transit, it's walkable, there's amenities and everything like that. Walking from downtown Vancouver to Burnaby, no, you're not going to do it. Getting to other areas of the region, a bit difficult. And the fact that there isn't this spread out, sharing of amenities and so on, we don't have a regional strategy. And I know we've got Metro Vancouver, but it needs to be even more than that. The whole Fraser Valley has to be part of a larger strategy. How important is that, and how do we see it play itself out in areas like, I know that you focused on the Bay Area, San Diego, and so on. How do they do it, and what can we learn from them?
Oh, we could learn a lot. So we have over 21 municipalities just in Greater Vancouver alone. And there has long been discussions that perhaps it's not as functional as it should be. And maybe I'm being diplomatic. But when you look at the North Shore, for example, there's the city of West Vancouver, there's the city of North Vancouver, the district of North Vancouver. Some may say, there's an opportunity for amalgamation in certain areas of the region. And so we did ask the business of cities in the UK, what have other regions done that we can learn from? And governance is an issue for sure. We didn't dive into this report, and it's something we may look at in the future. It is a very politically sensitive topic, understanding that. But governance and having the region work together is part of the solution, because you can't have silos among different municipalities and municipalities fighting for funding against one another. When we've got investors coming from, let's say, Germany, they're not looking to invest their money in Burnaby or in Richmond or in North Vancouver. They're looking at the Greater Vancouver region. Mm-hmm. And so we need to have a unified approach, and we have to have more connective dots between the municipalities as well.
I have heard that it also causes complications for the Port of Vancouver. So you take a look at the Port of Tacoma, for instance. It's like they deal with Tacoma. Not 21 other jurisdictions that are a part of it. Los Angeles, Long Beach, Singapore. They deal with one entity. Whereas here, they come in and they're dealing with the Port of Vancouver, but then there's all these other different, strings, I guess, that are pulling on what kind of agreements can you create? How are you going to be able to get products to move through the port as well as possible? Toronto did it, like they pulled together all of their different districts back in, I believe it was 1970s, and said, we're all one now. New York did it. Brooklyn and New York merged.
There would have to be political will.
I know it's not really what but I can't help but think that there's a component in this that if we want to all be pulling together in the same direction and make sure that we are an attractive destination for people to come here, not just to live, but to do business and build prosperous companies, we've got to make it as streamlined as possible.
We absolutely do. And who is going to put their hand up to have that conversation and to lead it? Where's the political will on governance and amalgamation, potential amalgamation or partial amalgamation? I don't see it right now. But I'm glad you mentioned Singapore. I was there in early April, and it was very eye-opening. It was the first time I'd been to Singapore, and you fly in and you look, and the port is very busy. And I know there's different governance there, and I'm not going to speak about the governance structure necessarily in Singapore, but what struck me is that they made a decisive decision that in 1959 to really have a unified approach around economic development and to accelerate economic development, to get some of the barriers out of the way. And I know it's different because it's a different government. I completely understand that. But I still think there's lessons to be learned from other jurisdictions where we can move things along more quickly, whether we're talking about the regulatory environment. It takes far too long to get projects approved. Whether we're talking about taxation, there is a need for an overhaul of the tax system. And, and it does attract investment. Investors have a choice globally where to put their money, and Canada increasingly, and British Columbia, is becoming a jurisdiction where it's just not that easy to get things done.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
I remember many years ago looking at the streamlined process that Calgary had put together, working with the federal government, the provincial government, and the city, and said, all of the offices that you need to interact with, to be able to set up your business here, they're all in one place. And we work together.
It's a little bit of a sore spot for us. And you know, Calgary, Alberta has done a very good job in the kind of promotional activities and trying to get people from BC to move. And it was one of the reasons why we did this shortage of industrial land report, because we looked only at Calgary. And so over a 4-year period, British Columbia, we lost 6,300 jobs, 500 million in GDP, and 500 million in wages, because companies could not expand or grow here. And so they had to go somewhere else, and they chose to go to Calgary because they have the land and because the barriers didn't exist. And so that's a great example. And we'll continue to lose business and jobs to Calgary unless we start to address these issues.
Who do you hope this report is going to motivate?
All of us. So that's why I say it is not just governments that need to make policy changes. Business needs to work together more closely to address some of these issues, and certainly around, you know, R&D and those kinds of things. And yes, it is government's job to create the environment for businesses to thrive, but businesses need to be keeping an eye on this and doing what they can. But I also think, you know, I'd love for, you know, the general population to pick this up and read it. I know it's over 60 pages, so it's a very dense report. But it should be a wake-up call that, you know, we have a strong brand, but our performance is lagging. And unless we take action, it is going to become a bigger gap. And then what does that mean for my kids, or, you know, maybe my kids' kids? What does that mean about Greater Vancouver? I've been born and raised here, and I've lived in many other places, but I came back here many years ago, and I love Greater Vancouver. And I want to make sure that there's some momentum around this, and there's some really, I would say, focused discussion about the levers that are needed to turn it around.
We're almost out of time here, but let's not end on a negative note. There are some strengths that we have that we can build on. You know, top of the list is what?
I would say it is the experience, and certainly, you know, Vancouver offers a great experience. I would also say our skilled labor, our world-class institutions, and if you look at some of the research that's coming out of these world-class post-secondary institutions, it is remarkable. I would say our bounce back in post-pandemic ridership on transit, but also I think, you know, just, and this is a little bit in the report, but it's also anecdotally, so it'll be captured if we go back and measure again. We have got this opportunity in front of us in Greater Vancouver around a bounce back in tourism, whether it's the cruise ships, whether it's the major events, which are economic development opportunities like the Taylor Swift concerts and Grey Cup and Invictus Games and FIFA. And so we have such a wonderful opportunity in front of us in the next couple of years. And I'm saying let's harness that and let's really leverage the opportunity for economic development and culture and social reasons as well.
Hopefully those high profile events will help to attract the kinds of organizations that want to grow here, that are developing export products, because then that brings more money into our economy and gives us the money that we want and need to carry out all the social programs that we desperately value.
And the Board of Trade is working with other organizations, whether it's Invest Vancouver or different levels of government, to really ensure that we're using these opportunities for economic development.
Well, thanks for doing the report, and more importantly, thanks for coming in and giving us a bit of a glimpse into what's in the report.